Let's talk about the Yamaha NS 800A. These speakers were loaned to me by the manufacturer. I was not paid to say anything or given anything for free. They retail for about $4,800 per pair, which is on the expensive side of bookshelf speakers, but I've also recently reviewed other bookshelf speakers that are in that ballpark. So it's not too extreme to think that bookshelf speakers can cost this much. Specs up front, this is a two-way design with a bass reflex enclosure. It uses a 6.5-inch midwoofer and a 1.25-inch dome tweeter. Nominal input power is suggested at 40 watts with max power at 120 watts. Sensitivity is rated at 86.5 decibels, and the crossover frequency is spec'd at 2.6 kilohertz. I will say that this speaker is very well built. When you take it out of the box, you can immediately feel the weight of the speaker, which usually is a good indication of the overall build quality. I mean, if the parts inside, like the crossover or the drive units, the magnet especially, are very heavy, then yeah, that's going to weigh the enclosure down. But you kind of get a good idea of speakers over the years when you review things of which ones are going to not resonate themselves. And this particular speaker has no internal resonance issues at all. It's built like a damn brick house. In my listening session of the speaker, immediately, all right, so I listen before I measure. Immediately, I thought, oh, this thing sounds kind of bright, especially with shakers and hi-hats and cymbals. It's just like it's very much in your face. So I was like, okay, I'm going to see maybe, what that's about later in the measurements. I continued listening, and the thing that I also noticed was that the bass just honestly, it seemed really weak. Now, this is when I had the speaker pulled out about 3 feet and them pointing directly at me. So I pushed the speaker back to the wall, gave it about a foot between the wall and the speaker behind it, or 1/3 meter. And in doing so, the bass was much more pronounced. And it actually wasn't boomy, it was just more present. I thought, there we go. Like, that's what I was missing. To help with that high frequency issue that I heard, I wound up turning the speakers 30 degrees off axis. So they were basically just pointed straight out into the room. And that helped a lot. That didn't really change the tonal profile of the speaker itself too much other than that. So having said that, I also noticed that something else just didn't sound quite right. Now, what I was doing in between was A-Being compared to a reference speaker that I recently reviewed, which is a kit build speaker from Audio First, and it's the Fidelia speaker. So when I was A-Being between those, you could definitely tell, like, all right, something in the mid-range, upper mid-range is off. Like, it just sounded, the Yamaha just sounded too soft, maybe too laid back. It was missing a lot of bite for particular instruments. And I just didn't like it, to be honest with you. So I measured the speaker, and then I looked at the results. And what I saw in the results were that the speaker, for the most part, is pretty linear. It's within about plus or minus 2 decibels. And it seems to do okay until it gets to about 10 kilohertz. And that's when all hell breaks loose with the tweeter. And it goes up to about 8 decibels or so. The other thing in the frequency response that I saw was that the upper mid-range, lower treble region, there was a wide scoop. And I thought, that's probably what I was hearing. And then the bass roll-off was a little bit different than I'm used to seeing or hearing. So that kind of helped explain why putting the speaker against the wall helped. With this in mind, I went to the speaker, I pulled up my WIM app that I use for my WIM Ultra, which I use to power, or feed, I should say, into a pair of March Audio P501 mono blocks. I used the EQ in that app. I brought that high frequency down. And then I also boosted that upper mid-range, lower treble region to kind of flatten it out. And I used a Q of about 0.5 for the parametric Q, brought it up about 2 decibels, and set the center frequency to about 4.5 kilohertz. And when I did that, it really brought the speaker to life. It really, honestly, in my opinion, that was what it was missing. In doing so, between that and putting it against the wall, this speaker sounded much more to my liking. Now, are you going to do those things? I don't know. I think that the really good aspect about the speaker is this overall build quality and its looks. It also has really good directivity, which means that the direct sound is similar in tonal profile to the reflected sounds. And that means that you can EQ the speaker with much success. That makes me think of Borat. I just confused myself. So moving on to the con side of things, again, the linearity. There's some issues there, especially with that high frequency breakup. And then the bass roll off profile. which I don't know that I can call that a con because there are a lot of speakers that are designed to be placed closer to a wall. And the reason you can tell this is just the roll off profile. Some will roll off and they'll roll off quickly, but if they go down to like 40 hertz or so and then roll off quickly, you don't want to put that too close to a wall because it's likely to sound boomy. Some, like the Kess speakers I've recently reviewed, will roll off and they'll have like a little bit of a knee to them. And those are designed to be placed closer to a wall. Some, like this Yamaha, will start rolling off a little bit sooner. The roll off rate itself will be shallow, but it'll roll off at a higher frequency. So that usually means that you can put the speaker a little bit closer to the wall without suffering a lot of extra boominess. Now what I'm going to do is provide you with a sound clip. So I take an original recording that I download from Epidemic Sounds. And for those of you who want to complain about the selection that I have, look, I get it. I wish that I could use something that I didn't have to worry about being copyrighted. I can't. So I'm using what I can find right now, and I may change it up in the future. If you want to go to epidemicsounds.com and see what they've got and make suggestions, do that. I'm using that original track, and then I'm convolving it with the impulse response, the anechoic impulse response of this speaker. This is going to be for the on axis. So first, we're going to listen to the original sound clip and then the convolved sound clip for the speaker. We're going to do that a couple iterations, and then we're going to look at the frequency response on axis to help explain why you heard what you heard. Before I get to the frequency response, let's just quickly look at the impedance. The impedance shows a minimum of about 4.3 ohm. But the thing that I really like is that there are no resonances showing up in this impedance graph. This is the on-axis frequency response, and this is what you just heard. So what you should have expected is a shallow bass profile, maybe a hollowness, just a tinge of hollowness in the mid-range compared to this portion of the mid-range right here. Or you might have heard it sound a little bit more chesty in the mid-range, especially for male vocals. So it depends on the relative sound, right? Like if there's a high frequency bump, you may hear that as a mid-frequency dip, okay? So you can hear them either way. In the higher frequency area right around here, we see that it swings down to about maybe 1.5, maybe 2 decibels or so. Now that's not a lot, but given that it's over such a wide bandwidth from between about maybe 2 kilohertz to about 10 kilohertz, you're going to hear that kind of deviation in the response. And if you EQ it back in, then you're going to hear that as well. The other thing that you most certainly heard is the high frequency bump right here. And when that hi-hat was just riding along, you would have heard a just standing out like crazy. That is this right here. The F3 is at 68 hertz and the F10 is at 35 hertz. And then the CTA 2034 data set right here, same thing you saw a minute ago, black on axis response. But I also wanted to point out that the speaker has good directivity. In the room where you have a more reflective environment and it's not just on axis anechoic, you can expect to hear something similar to this. So this is similar to what you heard in that convolved example, the sound clip example a minute ago, but there's a little bit more deviations to it because now you're also adding in the reflections from the sidewall and the floor and the ceiling, but mainly the sidewall reflections are going to impart their own tonal balance. And it's going to be right through this mid-range area. So earlier you had a broader dip on the on-axis response going down through here. Well, now when we account for the stronger reflections off-axis from the tweeter compared to the mid-range, because the mid-range is narrowed up in its radiation and the tweeter is wide in the lower frequencies, that mismatch is going to cause you a little bit of a bump in this mid-higher frequency area right there. So it's not going to sound saddlebagged all the way through. It's going to have a little bit of a kick up right here. So that might allow it to sound just a little bit more present in that particular bandpass. But for the most part, you're still going to hear that saddlebag of a potential laid back or lack of attack sound. This hasn't changed at all. I mean, if you turn the speaker 30 degrees off axis, you take it down about 1 to 2 decibels. I do recommend you doing that. Personally, I think that helps, but it doesn't resolve the problem. You need equalization for that, in my opinion. Burst decay looks good. So no resonance from the speaker. Horizontal radiation is about plus or minus 75. Now, a minute ago in the estimated interim response, I said the tweeter gets a little bit wider, and so it's going to fill in this little bit of a trough in that on-axis frequency response. Well, that's what we see here. this radiation of the tweeter is more broad than the radiation of that mid-range. So it's narrowing, and then boom, tweeter comes in and it's broad again. That broader radiation from that tweeter is what hits the sidewall, comes back at you in the listening position. It's going to make that 2K area stand out a little bit more than just the raw anechoic. So if you were listening in the far field in a room without any reflections, or you were listening in the near field where there's no real reflections to account for, then you would have heard the on-axis response. But in a room, you're hearing that combination of the estimated in-room response and the on-axis response. Vertical orientation, you can go maybe about 30 degrees above the tweeter, maybe 5 degrees below the tweeter, but stay at the tweeter. Harmonic distortion at 86 decibels and then at 96 decibels. Multitone looks good at 96 decibels at 1 meter. You're below about 3%, so that's good. But what happens if you use a subwoofer? You lower the distortion even more. I would advise you to use a subwoofer with the speaker if you want to bring it out into the room because you're worried about the depth of the sound stage. You know, like, and look, that should be baked in the recording, but I know that some people like bringing the speakers out far from the wall because it gives you more sense of depth because of the rear reflection off the rear wall. That's cool. But if you do that, your bass is going to not be good. So add a subwoofer. And adding a subwoofer allows you to lower the distortion in the mid-range, making it sound more clear. Additionally, adding a subwoofer will clear up this highest portion of the response nonlinearity at different output levels. In other words, you're just going to increase your dynamic range. Although the dynamic range for the speaker still looks pretty good for the most part. At 102 decibels for this one speaker, it kind of starts bouncing all over the place, but I think it's pretty good. It's not the greatest I've seen, but it could be much worse for sure. And that does it for this review. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, comment section below. If you have the time, leave a like. That would be appreciated. And a subscribe. If you'd like to help out the channel, you could do so one of two ways. Join me at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner. Get some behind the scenes info, and when there's some drama going down, I post it there, and it's always fun for people to enjoy the drama because I don't like doing it publicly anymore. Tired of all that crap. But, you know, whatever. Also, you can use any of my generic affiliate links that are going to be in the description section below for Crutchfield, Amazon, whatever. It doesn't matter what you buy. Just click that link. Go buy whatever. That helps earn me a small commission at no additional cost to you. And again, that is also very much appreciated. I will talk to you all later. Take care. Peace.